Hi, our debate for today is about service delivery for transition-age youth and adults and the issue of empowerment versus care. And as we go through this debate, feel free to look at our Prezi that's attached so that you can look at the visuals more clearly. In order to live fulfilling lives as contributing members of the community, individuals with disabilities have the right to meaningful employment, engage in opportunities for higher education, and live in safe, supportive environments that respect their autonomy. Unfortunately, many individuals with disabilities struggle in the transition to adult life as a result of the obstacles they face in the workplace, on college campuses, and in their living arrangements. Despite the value our society places on the pursuit of self-sufficiency and independence, individuals with disabilities are not afforded the same opportunities as those without disabilities in determining their post-high school choices and outcomes. Various stakeholders in the ongoing national conversation about transition services are divided along the lines of individual empowerment and integration into the greater community versus provision of more restrictive but specialized care services. Despite the high demand for appropriate services, there is limited formal research on best practices for providing them. In 2010, a review of existing literature, Hendricks asserted that the number of peer-reviewed articles on the topic is sparse and hampered by limited sample sizes and restricted population ranges. Research that does exist covers a wide array of topics, yielding few solid conclusions in any given area. In formal debate, we will present the often conflicting interests of various stakeholders involved in post-secondary employment, higher education opportunities, and living arrangements for adults with disabilities. We will provide a review of the existing research related to each of these three service arenas, but also draw upon national employment statistics, related stories in the press, and the experiences of notable stakeholders. We hope to bring the needs of individuals with disabilities at the forefront of our discussion, while also acknowledging very real concerns of potential employers, institutions of higher education, and families. With our debate, we hope to eliminate the complex concerns surrounding the issues of transition services and offer suggestions for reconciling differences of opinion. Now we will all introduce ourselves. I'm Hannah Duvall from Indianapolis, and I'll be introducing each of our three topics of employment, higher education, and post-secondary living arrangements.
Hello, I'm Ariel King from Phoenix, Arizona, and I will be summarizing the viewpoints of various stakeholders as our debate progresses.
Hi, I'm Samantha Favorite from Chicago, and I will be sharing visuals related to the research and arguments presented throughout the debate.
Hi, I'm Sebiti-Fahie, and I'm from Gaithersburg, Maryland. I will be sharing research on the arguments presented by various stakeholders on both sides of each topic.
Hello, I'm Mindy Godby from Anderson, Indiana, and I will assist Haifa with presenting research and also field questions at the end of the debate. Now on to Hannah, who will introduce our first topic on the perspectives of employers versus vocational support providers and employees.
Employment, though beneficial as a means to support independent living and personal development post-high school, presents unique challenges and risks for individuals with disabilities. Employers may argue that hiring individuals with disabilities presents more of a challenge than a benefit to their business or organization. As a result, employment statistics for individuals with disabilities often reflect high rates of unemployment or underemployment. However, vocational support providers and employees argue that adequate training and environmental modifications can significantly reduce workplace challenges. Ariel will now briefly summarize the employer perspective on employment of individuals with disabilities.
As Hannah explained, employers may argue that individuals with disabilities often lack the skills necessary to succeed in the interview process, work productively, and self-regulate during difficult situations without displaying problem behaviors. As a result, employers may raise concerns that individuals with disabilities are ill-prepared to take on autonomous roles within their organizations. Employers in the general community typically have limited exposure to individuals with disabilities and inadequate training on how to appropriately support them as employees. I'll now hand off to Haifa, who will share some research on the difficulties employers face.
Thank you, Ariel. The first argument employers may make against hiring individuals with disabilities that doing so is difficult and places an undue burden on the company. Hendricks 2010 provided a review of evidence-based research related to employment. The review concluded that there are a wide range of obstacles to successful employment for individuals with ASD. Most relate to performance-based deficits that many employers might argue prevent them from hiring or retaining individuals with disabilities on their staff. Samantha will now share a chart summarizing these performance-based deficits.
In this chart, the concerns that employers may have in regards to hiring individuals with disabilities are clearly represented. Employers that are considering hiring a person with a disability may consider the potential employee's interactional difficulties, productivity, problem behaviors, and the attitudes of others. Some examples of these deficits, as you can see, are underdeveloped professional skills, attention deficits, dual diagnoses, and inadequately trained support staff. The barriers listed are a small sample of why employers may be hesitant to hire individuals with disabilities or why care providers and families might advocate for care over autonomy.
Again, I'm Mindy, and I will be sharing some research on the difficulties that the idea of disabilities face. As it is, the number of organizations with the expertise and willingness to hire, train, and retrain individuals with disabilities is limited. In 2015, the Federal Partners in Transition Work Group called attention to the fact that in 2005, 57% of out-of-high school students with disabilities were employed compared to 66% of students in the general population. Furthermore, in 2005, young adults with disabilities earned an average of $10.40 per hour compared to $11.40 per hour for young adults in the general population. The obvious disparity in access to employment opportunities and assurance of fair wages could lead one to believe that many employers are openly against hiring individuals with disabilities. However, this is not necessarily the case. According to the Autism Speaks Family Services and Employment Think Tank 2012, employers often do not know how to redesign the workplace to support employees with autism. Unlike the trained professionals who support individuals with disabilities throughout their education, members of the general community have little knowledge of the types of accommodation and supports they could offer potential employees. As a result, even employers who would like to hire individuals with disabilities may struggle to follow through.
This challenge is especially relevant to the discussion of employment for specifically individuals with autism spectrum disorders. Although some level of expertise is necessary to support any individuals with a disability, the expertise required to support an individual with autism is even higher than that required to support individuals with other learning or physical disabilities. In 2011, Taylor and Seltzer found that there were low rates of employment amongst young adults with ASD who had recently finished high school. They also found that those who were employed had meaningless jobs, such as replacing dirty glasses with clean ones. In 2012, the Institute for Community Inclusion indicated that the majority of adults with autism are unemployed or underemployed. Furthermore, according to a 2015 report published by the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute and summarized by National Public Radio Health News, 20-somethings with autism were less likely to be employed than their peers with other disabilities, with 58% employed. In comparison, 74% of young people with intellectual disabilities, 95% with learning disabilities, and 91% with speech impairment or emotional disturbance were employed in their early 20s. Clearly, the difficulty of employing individuals with autism surpasses even that of employing individuals with other disabilities. Samantha will now reiterate this point and other concerns of employers with several visuals.
Okay, thank you, Haifa. The first visual comes from the National Longitudinal Transition Study. Here we can see a bar graph that illustrates the percentage of individuals with autism who never work or continue with their education after graduating high school. As we can see, a startling 66% of individuals with autism do not continue their education or work within 2 years of graduating high school. While the number decreases by approximately 20% as the age of these individuals increase, it's that employment and post-secondary options need to be addressed while individuals are still in high school. This figure illustrates many different statistics about individuals with autism. Right now, we will focus on employment. Before I begin, I would like to reiterate that this visual will be more clear in the Prezi presentation if you would like to refer to that. Okay, so here we have 58% of these individuals have paying jobs, while a mere 32% of people have a job soon after graduating from high school. This figure complements the last visual, which indicates that more support is needed for individuals to be employed within a few years after graduating. Now that we've outlined the perspectives of employers, Ariel will summarize the concerns of potential employees themselves and the vocational support providers who assist them in the workplace.
Despite the many concerns of employers, support providers often serve as important advocates for individuals with disabilities. Support providers argue that individuals with disabilities have the potential to become valuable employees as long as employers receive adequate training and employees receive adequate long-term support. Furthermore, both employers and employees can benefit from environmental modifications that increase productivity across all staff members and decrease problem behaviors. Haifa will now present research on appropriate vocational supports.
Thank you, Ariel. First, in a perfect system, vocational support should serve all individuals with disabilities by helping them to select the right jobs, seek out training, and access long-term on-the-job coaching opportunities. Hendricks 2010 argued in support of increased employment opportunities for individuals with ASD, proposing programs for long-term support and oversight during employment. Helping these individuals to obtain an appropriate job placement requires vocational support programs to consider their strengths, weaknesses, and specific interests. Hendricks 2010 proposes that with the help of these programs, individuals with ASD will be able to maintain long-term employment. Autism Speaks Employment Think Tank 2012 agreed with this assertion, but also stressed the need for vocational supports to be faded over time. The think tank argued that long-term help may be beneficial, but people with autism should receive direct instruction on how to manage and monitor their own behavior in order to avoid relying too heavily on job coaches in the long term. In order for individuals with disabilities to achieve the goal of self-management in workplace, they should begin receiving vocational training as early as high school. High school transition plans need to include opportunities for learning the skills required to find and keep a job. Shaw, Wieman, and McDonough 2012 assert that individuals with ASD should work while attending school because that can increase the chances of employment when they are adults. Therefore, high schools should provide internships to individuals with ASD.
Even with vocational training, workplace accommodations still may be necessary to allow individuals with disabilities to succeed. Taylor and Seltzer, 2012, argued that developmental disability services should focus on accommodating the needs of individuals with ASD without ID. Such services will allow these individuals to achieve high levels of autonomy and develop careers that are maintainable. Example workplace modifications include but are not limited to maps of important workplace locations, visual schedules, timers, written instructions, and checklists.
Ultimately, individuals with disabilities have the potential to become valuable contributing employees. Speaking specifically to the potential of individuals with autism, in a summary of the 2012 Autism Speaks Employment Think Tank, the organization aspired to shine a spotlight on the unique abilities, strength, and untapped resources of people with autism to potential employers and inspire business leaders and our stakeholders to make this issue a personal priority as well as a national focus. Sam has a visual to share on vocation rehabilitation services.
All right. This figure provides some information on vocational rehabilitation or VR services. Again, there's a lot of text here that may be difficult to see, so I will go over it thoroughly. VR is a government-funded program that is essential in providing employment and training services for transitioning individuals with disabilities. This guide explains the who, what, when, and whys of VR, as well as how it is implemented. VR services are a result of the Rehabilitation Act, which indicates that individuals with significant mental or physical impairment are eligible to receive VR services to prepare them for finding, keeping, and maintaining employment. VR services are established by the state, such as at what age VR services begin. To receive VR services, The individual with the disability or their legal guardian must apply, often with the assistance of a counselor. If determined eligible, an individualized plan for employment, or IPE, is created to clearly specify what services are needed. This figure can be examined more clearly on the Prezi presentation. Okay, and then we have this next visual that complements the previous chart, as it indicates the benefits of vocational rehabilitation. As you can see, VR has been provided to more and more individuals in the last 5 years, with 80% of workers becoming employed part-time. Services are great, but there is still room for improvement. Now that we have shared the opinions of both employers and employees with disabilities, Ariel will summarize both perspectives and discuss ideas for reconciling their differences.
Thank you. Although employers and vocational support providers and the employees they provide services for hold different primary objectives in the workplace, by working together, they can achieve the best outcomes for both businesses and individuals with disabilities. When supporting people with disabilities in the workplace, behavior analysts must consider Compliance Code 2.0, the behavior analyst's responsibility to clients, which asserts that they have a responsibility to all parties affected by behavior analytic services. Behavior analysts can help bridge the gap between employer concerns and the ongoing needs of employees with disabilities by providing the training, environmental modifications that are necessary to ensure that all parties feel adequately supported in the workplace. In doing so, they can also uphold the core ethical principle of respecting individual autonomy by supporting community involvement through gainful employment. Finally, by advocating for individuals who may not always be able to advocate for themselves in the workplace, behavior analysts can uphold the core ethical principle of according dignity. As a group, we feel that in the workplace, the ideal situation for an individual with a disability is one in which well-trained professionals provide an appropriate level of support while still ultimately preparing the individuals they serve for independence. And now on to Hannah, who will introduce our second main topic.
We will now discuss the perspectives of institutions of higher education and those of students with disabilities seeking a college education after high school. Like all recent graduates, many students with disabilities look forward to college as a time during which they can gain autonomy and enjoy new experiences. Unfortunately, post-secondary education can be very difficult for someone with a disability. Higher education requires independence, self-help skills, and flexibility. Laws governing the responsibilities of post-secondary institutions to accommodate for students with disabilities are far less strict than those governing elementary and secondary schools. As a result, many students taking this important step towards individual autonomy encounter significant barriers to success. If given proper support and guidance, individuals with disabilities pursuing higher education can feel empowered and capable of achieving their post-secondary education goals.
So first, I'll summarize the institutional perspective on higher education opportunities for individuals with disabilities. Although many post-secondary institutions do provide disability services, even those meeting their lawful requirements often fall short of truly ensuring social and academic success for all students. Elementary and secondary schools are held to a heavily legislated high standard when it comes to supporting individuals with disabilities. However, post-secondary education is seen as a privilege rather than a right in the United States. Therefore, institutions may argue that individuals with disabilities seeking higher education should already possess the self-management skills to engage with their studies autonomously, given only the most necessary supports. I'll now hand off to Haifa and Mendy, who will explain legislation and research related to the institutional perspective on post-secondary education for individuals with disabilities.
Relevant legislation directly reflects the argument that institutions of higher education are not responsible for ensuring that all individuals with disabilities can succeed in this rigorous, competitive college environment. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 protect elementary, secondary, and post-secondary students from discrimination. However, many of the provisions outlined in these legislations apply only to elementary and secondary schools. Post-secondary schools are not required by law to provide free and appropriate public education, FAPE. to individuals with disabilities, create individualized education plans, or provide transition services before graduation. According to the U.S. Department of Education, they are only required to provide appropriate academic adjustments as necessary to ensure that they do not discriminate on the basis of disability. In the post-secondary environment, responsibility for the success of an individual with a disability is placed primarily in the hands of the individual themselves. The college must only ensure that an individual does not face discrimination as a result of their disability.
This means that legislation specifically protecting individuals with disabilities in a post-secondary environment focuses on access rather than support. For example, according to the U.S. Department of Education, if a post-secondary school provides housing to non-disabled students, it must provide comparable, convenient, and accessible housing to students with disabilities at the same cost. More broadly, under the Americans with Disability Act, institutions must physically modify their buildings and sidewalks to be accessible by adding accommodations like wheelchair ramps, elevators, and accessible bathrooms.
Even laws addressing specific academic issues do not require colleges support or accommodate students with disabilities as individuals. Rather, they serve to ensure that the registration and testing processes are fair to all students. Again, according to the U.S. Department of Education, in providing an academic adjustment, a post-secondary school is not required to lower or substantially modify essential requirements. For example, although a school may be required to provide extended testing time, it is not required to change the substantive content of the test. On to Ariel, who will summarize the student perspectives on post-secondary education.
Unfortunately for many students, the sudden service cliff they encounter upon entering higher education may result in academic failure. Though post-secondary schools may legally meet the basic requirements for disability services, the bare minimum sink-or-swim attitude of many institutions may lead individuals with disabilities to see post-secondary education as unattainable. The impossible barriers of unsupportive attitudes and limited funding for adequate services may even lead those who attempt college to drop out. In order to succeed in college, many students argue that more institutional support is needed. Haifa, Samantha, and Mendy will share research and visuals on the difficulties faced by individuals with disabilities in post-secondary schools and provide evidence for the argument that institutions have a responsibility to ensure the success of all students, including those with disabilities.
As Ariel explained, many students with disabilities struggle in the rigorous and competitive college environment. A study by Van Hees, Moisen, and Royce, 2015, conducted semi-structured interviews with ASD students who attended college or university in Belgium. The authors found that these students have difficulties with meeting social and academic demands. They also have a hard time with sensory overload and time management. The students also found it difficult to determine their own boundaries and deal with problem-solving skills.
This time, we are going to focus on the education portion of this chart. According to this chart, 36% of young individuals with autism ever attend any post-secondary educational facility after graduation, and 30% attended any 2- or 4-year college. These relatively low numbers can suggest several different issues. Perhaps students with autism are not properly prepared for this transition during high school. It may also indicate that these individuals and their families do not know what options exist for them, or that colleges are not reaching out to these families.
Despite these challenges they face, many individuals with disabilities are capable of high achievement given the right supports. Individuals with disabilities in a position to consider college may benefit from greater autonomy than their lower functioning peers. However, they still require some specialized attention on the part of the institution. Van Hees et al. 2015 proposed several recommendations for academic institutions. The authors recommend that students with ASD should be offered support when it comes to academic interventions, transitions, student life, and daily living. Additionally, the authors also stress the importance of student involvement in their own transition planning periods. Students are able to discuss what has worked for them in the past and how that can be implemented in higher education. Furthermore, a coach should meet regularly with the students in order to supervise the challenges and activities they will face. This is recommended for both while transitioning to and in higher education institutions. Moreover, students with ASD should have access to adequate psychological support in order to overcome possible mental health issues. Van Hees et al. 2015 suggests that awareness programs should be put in place in order to educate staff and students with ASD. In doing so, students with ASD are encouraged to be themselves.
All right. So here we have a chart that shows which colleges have been awarded federal aid toward transition programs for students with intellectual disabilities, or TPSID programs. The writing is really small, so again, if you'd like to see this more clearly, you can look at our Prezi presentation. This list includes 26 different schools across the United States, as well as the representative for the TPSID programs at that school and how to contact them via phone or email. Schools were awarded 5-year federal grants to develop comprehensive programming for college students with cognitive disabilities, including ASD, enabling them to gain access to academic enrichment, social activities, employment training, and assistance in establishing an independent living environment. Shared with families so that they know that their children do have the option to go to college and have help transitioning.
So that visual concludes our discussion of the various positions on higher education. Taking consideration both the institutional perspective and the concerns of students, we feel as a group that post-secondary institutions could do more to support students with disabilities. Though we acknowledge that certain aspects of the caring, supportive environment cultivated in elementary and secondary schools are not translatable to the college environment, we still feel that institutions have a duty to ensure all students have the opportunity to succeed. As in the workplace, behavior analysts could play a key role in creating more disability-friendly college campuses. Acting in accordance with Compliance Code 2.03b, behavior analysts could support individual students in college settings by cooperating with other professionals in a manner that is consistent with the philosophical assumptions of behavior analysts in order to effectively and appropriately serve their clients. On a more systemic level, behavior analysts can also strive to act in accordance with 6.02 by making information about behavior analysis available through presentations, discussions, and other media offered on college campuses. Finally, behavior analysts working alongside admissions teams, college professors, and institutional support staff might serve as a positive influence by purposefully centering conversations around the core ethical principle of benefiting others. By advocating for a student-centered mindset, behavior analysts may be able to shift the sink or swim attitudes of many institutions and also help ensure adequate funding for necessary programs to support individual success.
I would now like to introduce our final discussion of this debate, which centers on the difficult question of post-school living arrangements for individuals with disabilities. This important and inevitable discussion can be a source of stress for individuals with disabilities and their families. The options for these individuals is limited based on their overall need. Based on the census information in the article by Enquist, Johnson & Johnson, 2012, there are roughly 7 million individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities living in the United States. Yet only 25% of these individuals actually receive services through publicly funded programs. Living situations for people with ASD and other disabilities can range from living at home, living in a group home, or living independently. Regardless of the level of care an individual receives, each of these living situations presents its own challenges. Living at home can especially become an issue because of the financial and emotional strain it places on the family.
I'll start out this topic by summarizing the concerns of care providers. Although it is easy to place blame on care providers for failing to provide necessary services to families, it is important to remember that these providers must operate within the constraints of a limited system. Care providers must contend with high rates of staff turnover, funding shortfalls, waiting lists, subjective assessments, and of standards of care. All of these dictate how they provide their services, as well as their ability to provide quality care for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Before discussing the shortfalls of the post-school care system in further detail, it is important to recognize the improvements that have been made to the system since the mid-20th century. During the years before World War I, institutionalization was the only option for those who needed placement outside the home environment. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 paved the way for community living, creating more options for these individuals and their families. Group homes, adult foster care, supported living services, as well as community protection programs are just a few of the many options and services that are now provided in lieu of institutionalization. These services focus on person-centered planning and strive to promote the greatest independence with the least restrictive means.
However, according to Inquist et al. 2012, one of the biggest challenges to these placement alternatives is the ability to find, train, and keep direct care staff. The wages of direct care staff are low, and many direct support professionals are seen as glorified housekeepers or babysitters, which makes it difficult to recruit individuals who are willing to stay in the field for an extended period of time. In addition, there is a lack of trained medical and behavioral professionals available to deal with the needs of these individuals and the challenging behaviors some will display. Other barriers include the local community objection to allowing individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to live in certain neighborhoods.
A second major hurdle care providers must face is the difficulty of obtaining reliable state funding for the individuals interested in their services. State funding is constantly changing, leading to volatile environment for the agencies providing services and trying to compete with other employers. Regulations and qualifying events, as well as assessments and evaluations, determine what services are available to the individual. A key factor is the reliability of these assessments is the consistency and the manner in which they are interpreted. Individuals who do not meet certain criteria based on the subjectivity of the testing may end up ineligible to receive the kind of services that in the long run could lead them to greater independence. Care providers could argue that even their best efforts cannot change biased funding assessment practices. On the whole, the process by which individuals is accepted into these services is lengthy and difficult to navigate. According to Anguis et al. 2012, this leads to increased frustration, not only on the part of the individual seeking services, but also the agency attempting to provide the services.
Before we conclude our discussion of the care provider perspective, it is again important to focus on the positive efforts many companies are making to better provide for those specific individuals in their care. In spite of the shortfalls of the overall system, many states are adopting meaningful day activities, or MDA, to support persons with developmental disabilities. According to Inquist et al. 2012, MDA exists to support participation of persons with individual and with intellectual developmental disabilities in activities and functions of community life that are desired and chosen by the individual. MDA includes purposeful and meaningful work, skill development, educational activities, and community inclusion activities that are directly linked to the vision, goals, and desired personal outcomes documented in the individual's care plan.
Thank you, Mindy. Although care providers have a strong argument that often systemic problems are at the root of an agency or company shortcoming, pointing fingers does little to help alleviate the day-to-day strain that ultimately falls on individuals and their families. Often, the burden of caring for an adult child with a disability leads to physical exhaustion and emotional fatigue for the family. However, Seltzer and Krautz, 2001, point out that there are some families who report that the challenges have brought them closer and taught them to be more emotionally involved and supportive of one another. Thackeray and Ito, 2014, spoke to mothers about the biggest challenge they face with carers providing services to a family member. One mother indicated that finding the right staff to work with their young adult was very difficult. Either way, barriers inherent in the system and attitudes of care providers make it difficult for families to advocate for their son or daughter in order to ensure the best possible path to independence. Overall, the best option for families is one in which both the individual and his or her support system can continue to thrive.
I will open the discussion of the family perspective on autonomy versus care for family members with disabilities by providing a breakdown of current statistics on living arrangements. We are referring back to a previously discussed figure, but this time we will be looking at the living arrangements. 19% of young adults with autism live independently, while 31% have lived separate from their parents. These statistics indicate that the majority of young adults with autism never move away from home, whether it be to their own place or to a group facility. As mentioned prior, This most common living arrangement can put a strain on the family. This information may indicate that more information about alternative living arrangements need to be shared with families, that a stigma on group facilities may be preventing families from having their children move out, or that some families prefer their adult children to live at home.
I will continue this discussion by sharing one common concern of individuals with disabilities in adulthood and families, which is access to adequate and appropriate health care. Bruder, Cairns, Mozzarella, Sims, and Stein, 2012, conducted a study that examined access to health care for adults with ASD. The author surveyed primary care physicians in order to gain insights on the resources for physician visits, living arrangements, employment status, and any services that adults with ASD were receiving. The physician reported that the majority of adults with ASD were living with family. As a result, these families faced stressors that could hinder the family's overall quality of life. Moreover, 54.7% of this population did not comprehend and follow the instructions of the physicians. As a result, caregivers needed to be actively involved in their care plan.
Results from Bruder et al. 2012 study reveal that there is a need for supports when it comes to the families of individuals with ASD specifically. Healthcare is often only one worry on a long list of individual and family concerns. Despite a strong desire to seek independence, individuals with disabilities may struggle with the idea of living outside the home due to limitations in their self-help and social skills. Parents are not always qualified to teach these kids, even to high-functioning young adults who might be capable of eventually living independently. Families would benefit from services that allowed them to slowly prepare for increased independence while accounting for their needs of their son or daughter.
To summarize both perspectives, we'd like to assess the positions of both care providers and families. As a group, we believe that, again, behavior analysts could play an important role in the betterment of an underdeveloped system. As we've discussed, care providers face legitimate barriers to the provision of adequate services as a result of low rates of staff retention and funding challenges. However, families face even greater challenges, striving to balance the needs of both their family member with a disability and the overall health of the family. Behavior analysts can serve both care providers and families by abiding by Ethics Code 2.09, which states that clients have the right to effective, research-based treatment that has been validated as having both long-term and short-term benefits to clients and society. Too often, post-school services become focused solely on care. However, learning should not end when a young adult leaves the classroom. Regardless of the environment in which they are living, individuals with disabilities should have ongoing opportunities to continue setting goals, working towards them, and gradually gaining greater independence. Programs focus on continued growth not only empower individuals with disabilities, but also reduce the strain on the system. As an individual gains more skills, they should require fewer services, and thus place less of a strain on the system and also their family. As highly qualified professionals using scientifically based principles, behavior analysts are uniquely qualified to dramatically impact the way the system approaches living arrangements for individuals with disabilities. Working alongside care providers and their families, we can ensure that learning continues throughout an individual's lifetime.
Before we conclude our debate, I would like to address the question posed to the group. The question is, what is the best possible scenario for transition to adulthood? Our response to that is that we believe that the best scenario in the transition to adulthood is to strive for balance between autonomy and care. Families need to begin the process early, involve the individual in decision-making as much as possible, and be as flexible as possible in the transition. One example of this balance is at Rising Tide Car Wash in South Florida. The company's vision came out of the need to provide a family member diagnosed with autism a meaningful life, including a job and friends. Their primary mission is to employ individuals with autism and change the perception, the attitudes in regards to their capabilities. They do this through intensive training of their employees and honing in on their strengths to ensure that they are set up for success. Within this environment, Rising Tide Car Wash is giving these individuals the opportunities that they need to become more independent and active member of society. A link to their YouTube video can be in conclusion of our study.
As a group, we will conclude by reviewing the varying arguments we presented, the issue of transition services for individuals with disabilities, We focused our dialogue around the three main questions individuals with disabilities must consider with their families after leaving high school. First, is employment an option, and if so, how will I find a job? Second, should I consider higher education, and if so, what challenges should I prepare for? And third, where will I live and how much support do I need? In considering each of these important facets of modern adult life, we presented views of various stakeholders.
First, we compared the concerns of employers with those of vocational support providers and the employees with disabilities that they serve. We concluded that greater awareness of necessary accommodations, better training of employees, and services focused on eventual independence could help alleviate many of the challenges that individuals with disabilities face in the workplace, and also alleviate the concerns of employers seeking to hire individuals with disabilities. Citing Compliance 2.0, we argued that behavior analysts can help to bridge the gap between employer concerns and the ongoing needs of employees with disabilities.
Next, we progress to an overview of the differences of institutional and student concerns on college campuses. Although institutions of higher education are less bound by legislation than elementary and secondary schools, we argued that they still have the duty to adequately support individuals with disabilities on their campuses. Again, we felt that behavior analysts could play a key role in uniting the differing opinions of institutions and students by acting in accordance with Compliance Code 203B and 602.
And finally, we discussed the often conflicting viewpoints of care providers and those they serve, individuals with disabilities and their families. Care providers argue that high rates of staff turnover and the various obstacles to obtaining adequate funding make it difficult to provide high-quality services the families demand. On the other hand, overburdened families have difficulty managing the ongoing complex needs of family members with disabilities. From supervising healthcare and arranging opportunities for social engagement to teaching skills needed for more independent living, many families struggle to cope with the post-high school service cliff. We feel again, behavior analysts could provide valuable insight to this problem by training service providers in research-based approaches and thus upholding Ethics Code 2.09. Behavioral analysts can also design in-home programs to teach young adults self-help, social, and self-advocacy skills that they need to gain increasing independence.
On the whole, we feel that transition services would greatly benefit from the influence of qualified behavior analysts. Working alongside other professionals in the field, behavior analysts can advocate for a balance between the autonomy of individuals with disabilities deserve and the supports they need. This concludes our debate. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to your responses.